Welcome back to my channel. I am Adorkable Rachel, and I am broadcasting you from beautiful Hawaii.
So by the time this video goes up, the classic Jim Henson film The Dark Crystal will have already been screened in US theaters via Fathom Events. And I can only imagine the reason they're doing this now is because on March 6th, we're getting a brand new Blu-ray release of the film, simply titled The Anniversary Edition. Hashtag not sponsored. Plus, I think most of us are aware by now that a Dark Crystal TV show is coming up on Netflix in the near future.
So I figured now's as good a time as any to do a review of The Dark Crystal, right? Even though I'm in an environment that's the complete opposite of The Dark Crystal.
The 1982 fantasy adventure movie The Dark Crystal was directed by Jim Henson and Frank Oz. It tells the story of a crystal on another world that cracked a long time ago, and two new races appeared because of it. The evil and bad-mannered Skeksis that use the power of the crystal to rejuvenate themselves, and the wise wizard creatures known as the Mystics who live far away in harmony and peace. And trust me when I say that's only the Cliff Note version of the 5-minute exposition that's narrated to us in the beginning. There's also a little creature called a gelfling named Jen, who is one day told by his mystic master that he must find the missing shard of the crystal and reunite it with the Dark Crystal before these three suns meet, or else the Skeksis will rule the land forever. Why the mystics didn't think to do this sooner, I don't know. Jen then finds Agura, who's an old lady creature that does not wear a bra, and she apparently has the missing shard that Jen's been looking for. Again, why they didn't just find her and try to fix the crystals sooner, it's a bit of a mystery. But the movie's also really not meant to live on that kind of logic. Anyway, Jen meets another gelfling named Kira, and she's kind of the Disney princess of this world if you think about it, because she can literally summon animal friends by singing. Well, there you go. So while being hunted down by minions and creatures that are under the control of the Skeksis, Jen and Kira persist on their journey to find out where the crystal shard came from and how it will restore peace to the land.
At the time of its release, the film definitely drew a lot of attention and criticism, especially for the fact that it was a lot darker than a lot of other works that Jim Henson had produced, most notably The Muppets.
While the Muppets, of course, are cute and colorful and family-friendly, this movie is definitely not a comedy, and it has a lot of creepy and disturbing imagery. Also, this was the first feature-length theatrical film that Jim Henson directed. That did not involve the Muppets. But despite criticism from audiences, Jim Henson had very much intended for this movie to be a scary adventure story, not just as a change of pace, but also because he believed that kids should be exposed to a healthy dose of fear once in a while.
And keep in mind, this is also around the same time that Don Bluth was coming onto the scene and also creating movies that were scaring us and making us cry buckets, so Jim Henson was not the only director to have this kind of mindset.
In fact, Jim Henson drew a lot of inspiration from classic fairy tales, which, at their roots, do have pretty dark origins. He even brought in English fantasy illustrator Brian Froud to design most of the characters and puppets for the film. But unlike Jim's later film Labyrinth, this movie was a moderate success at the box office and with critics. And the film even ended up winning a bunch of awards.
But also just like Labyrinth, no surprise, The Dark Crystal has developed a huge cult following over the years.
I went and saw The Dark Crystal when it was being broadcast the first night, and yes, just like when I saw Labyrinth in the same way, there was a 10-minute featurette hosted by current Henson Company CEO Lisa Henson, touching on some of the creativity of the film, showing some footage that I don't think has been available to the public until now. And I'm also pretty sure this is going to be on the Blu-ray, so really check it out if you didn't get to see it in the theater. Also, unsurprisingly, Lisa Henson talked heavily about how passionate her father was about creating the movie. And yes, this was very much a passion project for Jim Henson, as he had been developing it since the mid-1970s. He really wanted to do more than just create cute characters like the Muppets. He wanted to direct and create new worlds beyond what the Muppets and their movies had to offer. So he went and made this movie that was completely populated with different kinds of puppets and characters, and you can kind of see right away why it's called The Dark Crystal. It's a dark movie. It's not goofy or jokey, and it's actually kind of a downer flick. You know, with a cute little party thrown in there in the middle.
But that also gets destroyed in the movie, so that hardly counts.
The Gelflings, while they're well designed and cute and all, I especially have a really big fascination for the other larger puppets used in this film because they just seem so much more real to me. Both the Mystics and the Skeksis were operated by several puppeteers each, and they're also both very creatively distinct. They've both obviously been around for a long time, but while the Mystics are very wondrous and smooth in their structures, the Skeksis are very rigid and harsh in theirs. The Mystics are also especially interesting because while most puppets in the film are operated by puppeteers, apparently a lot of these creatures were brought to life by a group of mimes, actors, dancers, acrobats, and clowns, as were a lot of puppets in the film. The performers with these skill sets apparently spent months devising how these characters would move and walk, and all of that really does lend itself to the amazing power of the realism of these characters. You know there are people operating these characters somewhere, but it's also really hard to grasp that reality when these characters really interact with their environment. They just seem so alive.
Like, you know how when you watch the Muppets you still get lost in their characters, but you can still see them and know that they're puppets? Well, actually in this movie, you really do get lost in the characters, for realsies in this one. You don't see puppets at all.
The Skeksis are also fascinating in their conception because originally, those Skeksis were not meant to speak English. Yeah. Nope, originally Jim Henson wanted them to speak some made-up language. And this is a bit shocking when you think about it today because unless you're really letting yourself get sucked into the story, the scenes do have a tendency to drag on a bit too long. But Jim Henson originally planned for the movie to be strictly visual and he wanted there to be as little dialogue as possible.
And I mean, I can respect that. After all, film is meant to be a visual medium, so that can be very effective, but as far as creating a movie that's meant to be for a family viewing with a lot of slow scenes that also just creates this huge world that you have to absorb, it just, yeah, I can see why that didn't work.
And believe me, I've experimented on my own to see if I could get through the scenes with the made-up language or even with the sound off, and No, I'm sorry, Jim Henson, but I think you guys made the right call in dubbing over the language and making them speak English in the final product.
Quiet!
By the way, I don't know if this was meant to be in the original language, but you gotta love this one character who always sounds like he's tasting the most delicious sandwich of his life. And one of the biggest things to be admired about this movie is that it really was the first live-action theatrical film where almost everything you see on screen was handmade. There's no human actors on screen, well, besides the obvious wide shots with gelflings running in the distance. But other than that, with the exception of a few location shots, everything on screen is either a painting or a model or a puppet, all of which were made by human hands.
And from my viewing experience, that really is the strongest and most pleasing part of this entire movie.
There was clearly a lot of thought and creativity and imagination put into the creatures and puppets and environments, and it really does make you believe that this world does in fact exist. However, that kind of lends itself to one of the weakest points in the film. Going back to the Lisa Henson featurette in the theater, I wasn't surprised that she talked about how her father believed in the world of the Dark Crystal so much, or how he had a great eye for the look of it. But I was surprised at how brutally honest she was that the movie wasn't as good as it could have been. She was very real about the fact that it probably didn't do so well because the story was very weak. Yeah, she said that. And unfortunately, she's right. Because I love Jim Henson, but when you look back at his track record, he wasn't always very good at creating engaging stories. He really excelled at creating imaginative worlds, and it's obvious that the focus in this movie was more on how it looked and not whether or not the story would hold your attention. The visuals and puppets in this film are so great, but it's also a little ironic that Jim Henson really wanted a visual movie, yet so much of the logistics are learned through very expositional dialogue. The story is fine for some people, but unless you're really paying attention, it can be really hard to absorb all the details as well as comprehend some of the logic of this world. And that's also why not a lot of people are able to get attached to the movie on a narrative level.
But that also hasn't stopped this movie from having a really large audience.
Jim Henson fans, of course, worldwide love it because it's a grand movie that Henson and Frank Oz helmed, but I also find that a lot of other types of people love this movie because it's very easy to get lost in the world that it's created. And although the film is definitely flawed in its story and setup, I think it also resonates with so many people because we can see how much artistic passion was put into it. It really is amazing to see so many talented people behind one film. And there really was a real desire to bring something to life that was unique and original and that had never been done before. and also something that was so unfamiliar and inhuman. It's no surprise that this was the first live-action feature-length movie that didn't feature any human characters. It's not meant to be human. It's very much an escape into another world outside of the one that we're familiar with.
So interestingly enough, there was talks of a sequel at some point, and I think they even tried to develop it for quite a number of years, but that ultimately got scrapped because obviously we don't have anything right now.
Again, probably a good thing because when the original film was being released, Jim Henson himself said, "The story itself doesn't lend itself to a sequel. We will not follow it with a sequel to this picture. You could tell another story in the same world, but the story itself is complete." And yeah, I kind of agree with that because it would be really hard to go anywhere else with it. But that's also why we have so many books and comics released over the years, and hence why we're also getting a new show coming out. And if you didn't know, the show is apparently going to be a prequel, so that definitely works. And while we probably don't need a lot of exposition, thank you narrator, I still think it's going to be really interesting to see the roots of the story that we're so familiar with.
And besides, now that everyone's on the nostalgia train these days, fans will definitely be excited to tune in.
The original 1982 movie is clearly not for everyone, and not every parent wanting to share the cuddly family friendliness of the Muppets is going to be enthusiastic about showing it to their young children. But I've also talked to a lot of people that said that the Skeksis frightened them when they were kids, but they've also grown a great appreciation for the film even more because of that. I agree that a little fear is healthy, but I think it's also a little debatable as to whether or not the darkness in this film was truly appropriate for younger kids. There's no denying, the film itself can feel a little confused as well as hollow and a little slow at times, but it still grabs our attention with its eye-gripping visuals. The characters are likable and the Skeksis are a lot of fun. Plus, the world alone is just so mesmerizing to watch. If I had to place this movie, it would definitely be in the wondrously weird category that a lot of movies came from in the 1980s, as it can be a very acquired taste kind of film. You either love it, or it bores you to tears. Either way, I don't argue with either points of view. Regardless, I don't think it's too controversial a statement to say that it's still wildly underrated and definitely deserved a little more attention than it got. If nothing else, it really is an interesting and inspiring viewing experience, and it definitely has more good than flawed elements. Whether or not you love the works of Jim Henson, it's just a very endearing piece of work, and it's no wonder that people are still admiring it and enjoying it to this day. And take it from me, watching it on the big screen and seeing all the designs and movements and environments are just spectacular. So definitely check it out on the big screen if you can.
What was sundered and undone shall be all the two made one.
So those are my thoughts on The Dark Crystal, and now I'm really interested to find out, what do you think of this movie? Did you grow up with it? Did you only recently discover it? Did it have a big impact on your childhood? And also let me know, who was your favorite character in the film, or even your favorite puppet? And, of course, are there any other topics coming up that you want me to talk about in future Muppet Monday episodes? Well, go ahead and leave your comments below. Be sure to like and share, and if you're new and like what you saw here, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and also be sure to hit the little bell button down there to get notified when new stuff comes out, because I make new videos every week. Aloha, Adorkable Buddies, and I'll see you soon.